in this quadrant system. So if you knew exactly when an expense was going to crop up and you knew exactly what it was going to be for, great, no problem. Settle it early at a discount. Like I know my rent comes at the end of the month and I know how much it's for. I settle it early with my landlord at a discount. I save myself $25 a month or whatever it is. I don't actually do that, but could. Or in the first quadrant there, if you didn't know when something was going to happen, but you knew exactly what it was going to be for, you could buy an equity investment. And depending on your risk, your propensity to take on risk, you could either take a risky investment, a risky equity, like a high-tech firm, or you could buy a blue chip stock, something that's very stable in value. So I could buy, what's a very stable stock these days? A utility stock, or which one? Amazon. Is Amazon stable? I don't know much about it. Okay. IBM, okay, some big blue chip stock with relatively stable cash flows. I could buy a stock with that. The value's not going to change much. I don't know when something's going to happen, but it's okay because when it actually does happen and I know how much the expense is going to be for, I'll just cash out my stocks and I'll use that. Or if you knew when something was going to happen but not how much, you could buy a bond to just mature at that moment in time when the expense was actually going to happen, right? Just match the maturity of your investment to the perceived maturity of the event that you think is going to happen in the future. Or, of course, you would hold money if you were fully uncertain about all of these things. So in the last 5 minutes, I just want to give you a quick little model maybe you can use to think about these things. So again, just to summarize, people save money according to their specific perception of risk or uncertainty. And in particular, I don't like calling your cash balance savings, but you put money into your cash balance if you're completely uncertain about the future. And you hold money in equities for those expenditures where you don't know when they're actually going to happen, or you put money in bonds when you know when something's going to happen, but you don't know the magnitude of it when it's actually going to happen. So on the saver's side of the model, we have some specific reasons of why they would be saving or putting their income into the 3 specific avenues. Same thing on the borrower side, except borrowers don't borrow cash. They either borrow through the bond or equity market. So they borrow according to their preferences, and again, they borrow via bonds if the maturity of their expense is known in advance, or with equities if the maturity is unknown in advance. But in either case, the borrowers and savers are lending or borrowing in money. And we can put this all together into a simple little model that we call the loanable funds model, just to show the relationship between savings preferences, borrowing preferences, and the resultant interest rate and amount of money available to be lent or borrowed in the economy. So here we've got the interest rate is on the y-axis, and the x-axis is just the amount of loanable funds. This is the amount of money people want to borrow or the amount of money that people want to lend. I'm doing this in money terms. It could be borrowing or lending in anything, but money's the easiest. And we have a demand curve here. The demand curve is what? What type of people are looking to borrow money? Well, borrowers, obviously. People with high time preference. People that want to borrow money today in order to buy something, in order to consume in the present. And then we have a supply curve, which is composed of those people with low time preference, those who are willing to not consume today but to save their money and lend it to somebody else so that that person can use it and then pay them back in the future, hopefully at a profit or a higher rate. And the interplay between the supply and demand gives us the interest rate that prevails on the market and also determines the amount of funds that will available to be lent or borrowed. So here we've got $1,200 being lent and borrowed in the market, and it's going to be repaid at an interest rate of 5% for a year, let's say, although the term's not so important. And then we can see what would happen with changes to savings or lending preferences. So for example, what would happen if all of a sudden many people increase their time preference rate? Or people in general had a greater propensity to consume in the present. Intuitively, you say higher interest rates, and then if you go back to it, you would say, well, that would be represented by a shift in the supply curve. If people had a higher time preference and they started consuming more today, that would mean less money available for them to supply or lend to other people. And we could illustrate that by just a leftward or Joe, you like saying up and down when you shift curves, don't you? An upward shift in the supply curve. And of course, the upward shift or the leftward shift represents the smaller amount of savings, and it results, or it determines, that in that loanable funds market there will be less money available to be borrowed, which makes sense given people are consuming more and saving less. But also, that the price or the interest rate that you'll have to pay in order to borrow money, or that you'll be remunerated if you lend, will go up as well. Will go up as a response to that decrease in the supply of savings. And so throughout this whole lecture, I just wanted to show you that to follow on and to build off Professor Herbener's lecture in the previous time slot. Commonly, we all go to the banking system as our first origin for loans and for investment products. Both savers go there to put their money and invest it, and borrowers go to their banks in order to borrow money and fund their expenditures. And this doesn't have to be the case at all. In fact, it wasn't the case for most of history, and it's a relatively recent phenomenon that the banking sector has taken on such prominence and become so important to the detriment of other more traditional financing avenues like equities and bond investments. Thank you. And I believe there is a 15-minute break, and then a series of lectures at 3 o'clock. The one in here will be Bob Murphy talking about economics in the stateless society, and downstairs is Tom DiLorenzo talking about monopoly competition and antitrust.